Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry, we're running 3 minutes behind today, but hopefully you weren't, just itching for some biology action today. How's everybody doing? How's life out there? Have you gotten bored yet? uh, Going stir crazy? Okay. Well, looks like I am down to 0, but we'll see. Hopefully, some people jump in there soon. Um, we have lots of fun things to talk about today. We'll see how far we get. We'll see how long I last. I'm in my basement and it's getting quite cold in here. Okay, so yesterday we were discussing the types of natural selection. And so we discussed how in a distribution of a population, there would be variations, and those variations will have some sort of range. This can be kind of hard to wrap our minds around when we're thinking about population and we're talking about, thinking about a population. So a population a population will with some sort of variation will be will cover a range. And we talked about trees last time. Trees have a range of heights. Human birth weight has a range of sizes. It's a little challenging to talk about these ideas now because the populations that we're interacting with are not under natural selection that we can see. You usually can't see the natural selection that's occurring um, at the time of the uh, at the time that you're existing, right? We can only think about natural selection from the past to now. I'm just going to check. Yeah. Okay, we're good. Okay, I just want to check my sound level. Yeah, so we can't actually we can't go back in time and, well, that sounds like it's a little bit loud. Okay, we can't go back in time. We have to kind of think about at the time of yeah, okay. So what I'm trying to say is that the state of organisms today is a state that's known as equilibrium. They're probably in equilibrium. Maybe they're under a natural selection, but it won't be obvious until thousands of years later when we see that change that's happened over time. So we're going to just gonna check my notifications. I just got a huge ding in my ear and it was quite loud. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, so we want to think about the populations of the past that have led to the populations today. And very rarely are these going to be something we can actually look at in the time frame of our human lives. So let's talk about a couple of examples that we can look at. So one of those examples is industrial melanism. So this is an example that was observed for moths um, in the UK. Uh, Melanism is essentially the fancy science word for dark coloration in moths or dark coloration. So the melanin is the chemical that the body produces to the bodies produce to get pigment. And different organisms have different types of melanin, but but generally melanin is the origin of pigment. So this is the origin of pigment. And so this is it's a little protein. Essentially, it comes in a couple of different forms, gives things color. So makes things dark is really what it is. If you have brown eyes, you got a little bit of you got more melanin in your eye than I do. I probably have some sort of gene that doesn't function. It doesn't produce melanin. Whereas if you have brown eyes, you have a gene that does produce melanin. So we remember that genetic diversity naturally exists in populations because of naturally occurring mutations. So in a given population of moths, so this means that so in a group of moths the amount of melanin will differ. Or the better word would probably say there are variations in the amount of melanin. Maybe instead of, we can use vary to bring that connection to the word variation. Should we say between individuals? Now I have to shrink it again. Okay, there we go. Okay, well, hopefully you can see that. If not, remember these notes are posted on the classroom. So through mutations and just natural variations, we are going to have variance in terms of the amount of melanin, how dark the moths are. It is going to be the environmental pressure that acts on that population to choose those variations, those phenotypes that are most beneficial, which have the most fit, which ones are the ones that are going to be able to reproduce the most. So the example of industrial melanism of the peppered moth of England was an example where there were well-recorded records of moth species by entomologists for hundreds of years before the rise of industrialization, by which I mean the rise of factories. So in those observations, we found that in general, the moth population appeared to look like this, where this is one of the moths here, and there's the other moth. So thinking about these, this pair of moths, which one is most fit to this environment? Hopefully you're yelling at the top of your lungs at home that, of course, this really light-colored moth has this great advantage of being almost impossible to see, especially on this pixelated image. So we can barely see this moth, whereas the dark-colored moth is very obvious. So this one, this moth here can be thought of as, here I'm going to first make myself a little box. More fit. So this moth here is more fit, and the other one is the less fit. So in terms of getting predated on, so which one is going to be prey more often, of course the one that is darkly colored is going to have the harder time hiding from predators. Now, over time, there was an environmental shift. So this is a environment change. Around the the late 1800s, we start to form factories and coal fire plants and things like that, and pollution becomes a huge problem in the UK. And now, zooming in here, this one you should be able to see him a little bit easier, but there is a moth right here, and so this one now is more fit. And so from the perspective of natural selection, we would expect that if we measured the number of moths of various of the two variations, in the earlier example, the moths would be largely tipped towards the white color, and in the more recent time, or in the industrial time, the darker moths would be more popular. And this is exactly what entomologists found. So we could probably look at this backwards and say that entomologists probably found this relationship first, and then with the publication of natural selection in the 1850s 1859 or whatever, they looked at this example and said, hey, well, this makes sense. I guess 1859, that's a long time before the industrialization. Not long time. Anyways, so thanks for everybody for showing up. I do see some quite a few viewers today, so that's great to know that you're out there. If you have any questions at any time, just feel free to throw them in the chat. I have the live chat right in front of me, so I am looking at it and checking it regularly. So here we see that the camouflaged benefit of being that variation played a huge role. So the dark moss suddenly became the more popular moss in the later, in the mid 19th century or early 19th century. Soot and dirt everywhere was a huge problem in those times, and only with when we got rid of coal power, or we reduced the amount of coal power, did we see that that the amount of I don't know. I wonder if the moths have returned. That would be interesting to study the moths now. That would be to see if their population has rebounded. So in this case, the pressure is moving the moths from one extreme to the other, right? So we have, let's use a text box here. So moth variations shifted from one extreme to the other under a change in environment, change in habitat, change in habitat color. Yeah. So this change from one extreme to the other might be so you might be getting some buffering now, but this change might be causing would be considered directional selection, and the species stayed the same, so we would consider this an example of microevolution. Same species with a change in variation. I'm just going to make a request here. Okay, I'm gonna see about fixing this stream. I see that we're getting a little bit choppy, so just 1 second. All right, let's see if that fixes things. Just turned off the kids' show. See if Netflix was getting in the way. Okay, this is microevolution. So another example of microevolution is in antibiotic resistance. So in this case, we have lots of examples, but one example is S. aureus. Am I getting some bad values here? Again, 18% dropped frames. Okay. Let me see if that's, oh, let's just go live. Oh, okay, all right, so I am back. Okay, so my preview was had died off, so I was worried there. Okay, hopefully it's not too choppy for you, but we'll see how it goes. So antibiotic resistance in S. aureus, this is a bacteria that covers our skin, and it is one of the causes of some nasty infections. So MRSA is an example of a resistant version. So sometimes you'll hear about an MRSA infection, MRSA. This is an infection of a resistant version of this strain. It's known as a superbug. It's methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA. So that's a really common example of a dangerous, what usually if you have a staph infection, that's a staph infection is an infection of this S. aureus. And if you have an MRSA infection, then you have a variant of a staph infection where the S. aureus is resistant to bacteria, to the antibiotics. And this can be quite dangerous, especially if you're in a situation where you're immunocompromised or worse. So I am having really bad streams. There's no data. Let me just check what's going on. I just got what's going on here. Got a healthy stream now. Okay. All right. Hopefully I'm back for you. Just had I got a little error in my stream that I was running that my data died. But now we're back. It looks like. Yeah, it looks like we went down for a second. We came back. Okay. So we our scientists have been treating S. aureus as with antibiotics for a long period of time. Penicillin was a common treatment, and then by 1947 we started finding strains of S. aureus that were resistant to penicillin. So that's 4 years later. So they started using what is known as methicillin, which is a variant of penicillin, a modified version of that drug. And then in the 13 years later, 14 years later, we noticed resistant strains to methicillin, and now vancomycin was used instead. And boy, am I having some really bad data problems here. Okay. And so then we later had to use oxazolidiones and others. And even in 2003, we have strains that are resistant to that. And I'm sure that there are more antibiotics that we use today. It's funny how this morning I had no problems at all with streaming, and now I'm getting just nothing but problems. I guess it's the middle of the day, and that's usually where most people go to use their internet. Okay, I'm not sure what I can do here. My settings are pretty low right now, so yeah. Well, hopefully it's mediocre at best, but maybe I will slow down my own. I'm just gonna pause that. See if that's makes my data requirements lower. I'm gonna turn my phone off of on airplane mode. Free up some bandwidth. Okay. Well, hopefully things are going okay. Sorry if there's a couple flashes there. Okay, so in this case, the pressure here is this this environment's getting dangerous, right? So the antibiotics serve as a predator or danger in the uh, bacteria ecosystem environment. And so those bacteria that are resistant, um, those that are resistant have higher fitness. So directional selection. Let's go with higher resistance. And this is again is going to be a type of microevolution, as we are noticing a change over a short period of time, change over a short period of time with within a species. So, one question is will we ever solve the problem of bacterial superbugs? Probably not. Unfortunately, the way that humans kind of work, we live in close proximity to each other, and we give each other diseases. Maybe through careful more application of hand washing and cleanliness, we will reduce the spread of bacteria as we're currently doing with COVID, and that will slow the mutation rates down for these bacteria. I just saw a notification that the virus apparently is mutating very slowly, so that would suggest that humans are doing a good job of keeping the virus from spreading. We're keeping the virus, curbed, um, and yeah. So I'm going to I just want to grab this so I can see what's going on. And okay, well, not getting very good. It's still not very smooth, but hopefully that'll upload later and be at full resolution. So yeah, so what am I trying to say? In terms of methods for attacking bacteria, we have lots of newer techniques that are evolving right now. Um, but yeah, we have evolution by natural selection is always happening. So these bacteria are always getting stronger. There are some new technologies, technologies for combating superbugs, include effective vaccinations, and development of gene altering technology. So GMOs, there's some talk about genetic modification in a way that we could modify individuals' DNA so they would be resistant to bacteria more immediately. They wouldn't have to, and other ideas. Developing technology, we could modify bacteria to efficiently to hunt viruses, or modify immune cells to be to better identify invading bodies. Okay. So in a similar situation, we have pest resistance. The pests have also shown the ability to develop resistance over time. And so this is something that has happened in quite a few examples. So for example, in the 1940s, about 7% of crops in the US were lost to insect pests. By the 1980s, 13% of our crops were lost to insects, even though we've increased the use of pesticides. So in the 1940s, pesticide use was probably minimal or lower at least, and now with increased pesticide use, we're seeing an increased loss to pests. That seems backwards, right? That's backwards to how you might expect it to go. This pesticide resistance, I just saw what happened. I know why I lost my bandwidth. My darned Google Drive just started backing up in the middle of a video. Okay, we should get some pretty good streaming in a second as my computer suddenly gets back all the bandwidth that Google is taking. I never even thought to pause all my syncings. Okay, well, we should see some good solid bandwidth now for the remainder of the class. Okay, so pesticide-resistant insects were a problem, or are a problem, so pesticide development, especially development of new pesticides, is very difficult. We have to ensure that they're going to be safe for both the environment and for human consumption. Uh, at this point, we usually bulk spray our farm crops with pesticides. So everything is covered in the pesticide, including the fruit that you're going to be eating. You get that fruit in your house, you're going to eat it. That pesticide better be safe to eat. They are washed at a certain point before transport. I believe there is a washing solution that's sprayed over any crops that are being exported to reduce the amount of pesticide on them. But by the time they get to your house, they've also gained all sorts of other things like, you know, mice feces and stuff. So, you should wash your fruit. That's what I'm trying to get at. Wash your fruit, wash your vegetables. When they get in your house, you don't know who's been handling them, what's been happening. When you go to wash your fruits and vegetables, typically from at least a chemistry perspective, the pesticides and debris are usually organic matter, and organic matter will dissolve a lot more efficiently in a soapy basic environment. So just using water on your fruits and vegetables is not usually going to be enough to take off the sort of organic, greasy pesticides and fertilizers and things like that that's on your fruits and vegetables. So please, please, please apply liberal use of soap and water, and you'll find that they even taste better. I've been using soap and water on my grapes lately, and I find they taste completely different. There's definitely a layer on those grapes that white powdery layer. You don't want to eat that. Like, get that off those grapes with some soap and water, and you'll enjoy a much tastier meal. Same thing with apples. Apples have that sort of wax over top of them. Yeah, definitely go for it. Wash it, soap and water. At the very worst, you're going to be eating soap, which is, if you're using dish soap, it's probably safe for you anyways. And you at least won't be eating pesticides. So we have lots of different pesticides that have been developed. One was DDT. But DDT unfortunately found its way into large birds of prey through bioaccumulation, and it actually caused eggshells to become thin and brittle. And so we had to ban that in the 1970s. And then since then, we've used a lot of different products. The biggest thing right now is probably one thing that probably should be added to this booklet is something I have only a small passing idea about, which is Roundup Ready. Roundup Ready ready wheat, which was developed by Monsanto, and is a topic of great debate. So Monsanto spent, a couple $1 million or more, probably hundreds of millions of dollars, developing a genetically modified, genetically modified wheat plant that does not, or is not affected by the weed uh, weed and pest killer Roundup. I guess it's a weed killer. So Roundup's a really effective weed killer. So you can spray your crops with this stuff, and it will, if you think about weeds as a pest, they absorb nutrients from the soil, and they use up some of the water. And so for farming, if you have weeds growing, then you'll have to apply more water. You'll have to apply more fertilizers and nutrients to your soil in order to grow both the weeds and your wheat, and they might attract more pests and different types of pests and things like that. So they don't want weeds to be growing with them. North American or European style farming typically is interested in monocrops. They want one type of crop to grow in that whole planted area. Um, so they created this plant. Now you could spray the whole field with Roundup, kill all the weeds, not have to spend extra time pulling the weeds by hand or building a machine that would do it. And this was a really important invention. It led the way for the ability to grow plants closer together. So the wheat could now be grown in closer proximity. And I believe it had higher yields, or maybe I'm thinking of canola. And with higher yields per area. That's not how you spell yields. But the problem was that now that you've provided this ability to spray an area with Roundup, you suddenly start to have natural selection towards the weeds. And so more recently, the Roundup resistant weeds have been discovered, I believe. I'm going to do a double check on that. Roundup resistant weeds. Roundup is all one word. Species that may be prone to glyphosate resistance based on resistance to other herbicides. Yeah, so Roundup is also what we talk about glycophosphates. This this opened up a couple of other problems. Now farmers didn't have to they didn't have to be cautious with the application of glycophosphate because they could add it to their fields more liberally. They don't have to worry about burning up their plant life. And then that extra glycophosphate could become runoff and end up in their water supplies, feeding algae in lakes and things like that. So there are a couple other problems from that point. But in all of these cases, we are talking about a similar case as the previous. So where the pressure is the presence of a pesticide creates or a pesticide makes resistant individuals more fit resistant population, portion of the population more fit. So this is going to be, again, directional selection. And again, these pests are not changing their species, they're just simply changing variation. So a change in variation equals microevolution. So if we wanted to find an example of something a little different, maybe a divergent evolution, we could think about some of the larger examples. We'd probably be looking at an example that has divergence. So possibly the finches would be a great example of divergent evolution. So in finch evolution, we see the divergence of one beak type into the seed-eating beaks and the bug-eating beaks and the other types of beaks. So maybe let's put a little note here about something like that. So in Darwin's finches, one species of finch, uh, finch, uh, one species of finch populated an island, the Galapagos Islands, and experienced a variety of different competition pressures, different divergent evolutions, macroevolution, I guess. There was competition over bugs and seeds. Those with stronger, shorter beaks were more successful eating seeds, and those with longer, narrower beaks were better at catching bugs. So these variations diverged. Did we call it divergent selection? I'm just going to slide back up. I cannot remember what we called it. Disruptive selection. Disruptive selection left those with middle type beaks at a disadvantage because they could not collect bugs or seeds as fast as the other types. Something like that. So that could be kind of a version of the story that applies to the Darwinian finches. Okay, almost done the class today. So the last couple of sections that we have are we're going to talk about adaptations. Then we're going to talk about niche differentiation, which is a way of justifying why natural selection eventually sort of slows. or why equilibrium can be reached. And one of the reasons why natural selection might not always be active, or why a species might be able to last for a long period of time. On a side note, I would like to share with you the success of my 3D print. This is my chimpanzee skull. So this was collected from a CT scan of a chimpanzee by an anatomist. So I 3D printed that skull, and it's pretty cool. I'm very excited to get it back with my other skull examples at River Osborne there. And it's a really interesting to compare this to the Australopithecine and seeing how much of a divergence there is there. Australopithecine is an early hominid, and they have a much different cranium yet again. They do have the same similar jaw shape, but their cranium is quite small, but also shares a lot of characteristics. And the one thing that we always find every year when we go to analyze our hominids is that the Australopithecine seems to share characteristics with the chimpanzee and with the Homo species like Homo erectus and Neanderthal. So I'm going to print out a gorilla skull next, and that'll be very exciting because you'll see in the gorilla skull that they have a very different shape back here where they have a modified ridge in the back. That's sort of a flange that sticks out. But you probably won't see that till after spring break because that one's going to take another 2 days to print. So that'll be my next couple of days of 3D printing. Very exciting. Okay. Do I want to talk about types of adaptations today? I think we're going to maybe leave it for now because we are actually at a good point where if you are looking to spend an hour of biology a day, then you could spend the next 7 minutes or so, is it 7 minutes? The laryngeal nerve video. So the laryngeal nerve video, I just posted an activity for that. It is a 4-minute video. So if you could spend 4 minutes watching that video right now, and then spend the rest of the time doing the activity I posted, I'd like you to answer those 3 questions, and I think you're able to do that. It might be an advantage to do that after we have talked about way down here, this slide here. So maybe I'll do this little slide and then we will go. 10 minutes. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk about this slide here, and then I'll come back to those other ones tomorrow. But one thing I want to stress is that natural selection does not mean a movement towards perfection. Natural selection is playing on the current variation. So if a variation is not there, then we can't modify it. And it also depends on the types of pressures that are available. So if there's no pressure to change something, then there will be no change to that thing, whatever it is. So natural selection does not lead to perfection in organisms. Natural selection operates on the variation already present in a species due to the random mutation of genes and I guess one thing we should put, and the genetic history, or the genetic history of their gene pool, or and the genetic construction of the gene pool. Sure. So what you need to have stuff already in the gene pool, and genetic legacy. I like this word legacy. This is a Darwin or a Dawkins word that he uses all the time, but genetic legacy. So adaptation by natural selection is a slow, continuous process. The changes build up over successive generations under selective pressure. Should environment change rapidly or a pressure too extreme, then organisms will die and the populations will no longer be overpopulated. So that's a possible extinction. So when we think about not being perfect, one example that I've sent you a video about is the laryngeal nerve. So the laryngeal nerve is a leftover that we have in all animal kind. It connects the vocal cords, which are right here, to your brain. But instead of connecting them in a direct line, it actually goes all the way down to your heart, around the aorta, and then up to the vocal cords. And so this is a very long road, but in fish, this is a direct connection just around the heart. It's not a very long detour. So as we differentiate away from ancestral fish, the detour becomes increasingly circuitous, but the actual cost, the cost of growing a longer nerve versus the cost of variations that don't have this nerve is very low. So there's not enough environmental selection for growing a new nerve. Individuals, well, it should be noted here, right, that individuals in all species may very well be born without this detour, but they do not gain a significant advantage in terms of reproductive success such that those without the detour will gain a larger proportion of the gene pool than those with a detour of the next gene pool, of the next generation's gene pool. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that, sure, maybe there are mutants that are born every day that don't have the detour, but those mutants don't have a huge effect. It's the same idea as the wisdom teeth, right? So human wisdom teeth, some have them, some don't have them. These have minimal impact on human reproductive success. So the distribution of number of wisdom teeth can be somewhat random. Let's say the variation and so for various organisms, it doesn't. For humans, having more or less wisdom teeth doesn't really impact our success. Doesn't impact our ability to find a mate or to survive in the past, at least. So that we don't see very much pressure for the wisdom teeth number to change over time. Possibly, in the past, wisdom teeth were probably impacted when human head sizes shrank, or jaw sizes shrank, but yeah. All right. Lost that thread. So anyways, I want to think about these ideas as you watch that video and do this activity. See what Dawkins has to say. If you want, there's lots of videos about the laryngeal nerve, and I just want you to be able to summarize those ideas. With that, I'm going to leave you with the last little while of class to work on that homework, and the best of luck to you, and I will talk to you tomorrow. We have 2 more days this week, and then it is spring break, and I'll probably slow down on the streams during spring break. I'm considering maybe doing a couple just so that we maybe I'll put up a poll or something, but we are not required to have classes during spring break, but we will come back after spring break for another week of digital classes, and maybe we'll try some other things during that second week. Okay, best of luck to you, and stay safe, stay inside, and wash your hands, I guess, and have yourselves a great day.